Tales of Stattendor, The Unlikely Company. Chapter 1. The Sword of Axanar, Part 5. Watching the entrance to the forest under the slowly setting sun, Zander stood patiently on the roadside. Even from so far away, he could just make out the palisade that surrounded Rycroft. Being so far from what he knew felt unnatural, strange even. Turning his eyes back toward the forest entrance, Zander saw thousands of varying types of trees ahead of him. The Saltwood had always stood alone among the leagues of marshes and prairies surrounding the ancient forest. Peering past the parting of the trees, Zander looked within and noticed a path that was not well kept. Bushes and brambles were beginning to encroach upon the road as nature tried to reclaim it. He wondered where the path led, how old it was, and when exactly was the last time someone had tried to venture into the forest. From over his shoulder, Zander could hear the shuffling of bags and feet along the road. As he looked back, he saw Tillman. He carried a large pack over his shoulder, with others following behind him. Nervously, Zander adjusted his tunic while waiting for the group to approach. Tillman was the first to make it to the mouth of the forest. He stopped beside Zander before greeting him by patting the young man on the shoulder. "Glad you made it," Tillman said with a smile. Before Zander could even speak a single word, a member of Tillman's troop barged past and breaking up this friendly moment. Zander caught his bearings and found a short, stocky man between him and the leader of the expedition. This dwarf carried in his hand a crossbow and a pair of quivers filled with bolts. As the dwarf looked over to Zander, his grey, bushy beard and scruffy hair seemed almost matted. The dwarf looked at Zander with a pair of brown eyes and a deep scar along the left. Even standing at 4 feet tall, he still looked down his nose at the boy. "Is this your scout you've told us about?" the dwarf asked while turning to Tillman. Tillman nodded in response. "He knows the woodland well." The dwarf rested his crossbow against his shoulder. "His cut better not be coming out of mine, I'll tell you that right now." Zander seemed confused by this, and looked at Tillman with bewildered eyes. The leader of the group remained silent while looking back at the ambitious lad. Tillman was the first to blink. "I'll be paying him directly. It will not affect anyone's cut." Another member of the company strolled over to Zander. A tall, yet very nimble fellow, with bright golden hair and pointed ears, inspected Zander with brown eyes. Zander noticed the pair of short swords hanging from his belt on either side. Sturdy leather armor over his forearms, shins, and chest provided all the protection this stranger needed. Beside his eyebrows, this fellow lacked any sort of facial hair, and seemed unnaturally youthful. "You're an elf," Zander said in awe of the stranger. The elf seemed amused. "My name is Pabilar. What of you, boy? What is your name?" "Oh, Zander," the young man replied. "I'm from Rycroft." The elf looked the boy up and down with a stern gaze, yet did not speak a word. Zander's boots were scuffed yet sturdy. Haphazard stitchwork across his tunic showed wear and tear over the years. "Well, Zander of Rycroft," the elf spoke solemnly, "it is good to meet you." "Oh, good to meet you as well, Pabilar." All 4 men looked towards the forest, yet only Zander felt a deep sense of unease. "I think we should be going, unless you want to set up camp and wait for nightfall," the dwarf bitterly stated. Tillman scoffed at the notion. "Oh, Volgar, we're not waiting for anything. We're leaving immediately." Tillman, Pabilar, and Volgar gazed upon the forest with a blend of excitement and anticipation. Zander took one more look back towards Rycroft from over his shoulder, unsure if he might see his hometown again. Unable to enjoy this farewell of sorts, a sudden jab to his side snapped him back to his surroundings. It was the dwarf Volgar. He stood looking up at him with a scowl. "Let's get a move on, lad," the dwarf grumbled. Zander then fixed his gaze back on the forest. The four began their journey and walked towards the woodland. Zander dared not look back to his home, worried his companions would see his nervousness. He was the first of the four to cross the boundary of the forest and enter the woodland. The others followed behind him, all eager to seek their prize. Not a single one hesitated. With the trees pressed close together, the fading sunlight struggled to penetrate through the foliage. Within the forest lingered a quiet Zander had not really heard or noticed before. Volgar passed the young man and raised his crossbow. "Should we not be hearing the chirping of birds or something of the sort?" he wondered. Zander remained silent and tried to listen himself. Aside from the odd breeze whistling through between the branches of the trees, much of the forest seemed devoid of life. It unsettled him deeply, yet he pressed on with the others. As the four walked among the trees, Tillman carefully removed a scroll from his pack and untied the twine around it. Zander caught glances from over his shoulder of Tillman unravelling the scroll, watching his eyes frantically looking over the parchment with interest. Zander himself became curious. "Keep your eyes peeled, lads," Tillman stated. "Look for a tree with a deep slash across its trunk." The four arrived at a fork in the road where it split between two different directions. Neither path differed from each other in appearance. Both were equal in that of natural beauty, but went in opposite directions. Tillman frantically looked over the scroll for something to assist in this choice. Zander looked around at countless trees surrounding them. He noticed the ruggedness of the bark and how each tree seemed to differ from the other in minute ways, whether it be the markings upon the tree, the thickness of the moss, or the shapes of the leaves growing on them. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about this place, it was different to what he expected. Pabelar looked around as well. He noticed something. In the surrounding area, he raised his hand and pointed towards it. "Look yonder," instructed the elf. Tillman, Volgar, and Zander focused on a single tree among the hundreds around them. Just then, they saw it. One of the trees bore a deep slash, running downward horizontally. Tillman rushed to the tree and tenderly brushed his hand against the oak, as if he were tending to a beloved pet. Zander simply watched with the elf and the dwarf, who waited silently. All three continued to see their leader frantically comparing the scroll to the markings along the tree with furious interest. Without much warning, Tillman then dropped to his knees and began to rigorously pull at the weeds and brambles surrounding the tree, sending grass and twigs up into the air in all directions. Just then, amidst the carnage which it caused, Tillman noticed something. A smooth black stone sat almost hidden beneath the tall grass, but could be seen due to the contrast of colours. Cautiously lifting the stone up, Tillman flipped the stone to the other side. Carved into its underside was an arrow pointing to the right. Taking a moment to catch his breath, Tillman then placed the stone back among the grass before dragging himself up to his feet. "We take the right turn," Tillman ordered. "Should we not take the stone with us?" Pabelar asked. Tillman remained silent as he simply rolled up the scroll and returned to the main path. He then took the right turn. The dwarf, the elf, and the young man were quick to follow behind their leader deeper into the forest. The silence from the forest and from Tillman seemed to answer Pabelar's question. As they continued on deeper into the forest, Zander started to notice small differences in the trees once more. They appeared taller than the others, their branches reaching higher into the sky, almost shrouding out the sunlight from above. Shadows were cast upon the road ahead. That great sense of unease seemed to return to Zander once more. He remained silent. He kept it to himself. He just followed the others, further and further into the forest. If you've enjoyed our work, please consider supporting us on Patreon. Every subscriber will gain early access to upcoming episodes, early access to upcoming comic books, and additional content such as short stories and novels and novellas. So subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes of Tales of Stattendor, the Unlikely Company.